It was the kind of night no soul dared to travel. The wind screamed across the endless plains, tearing through the dark like a wounded animal. Snow didn't fall softly from the sky. It slashed sideways, sharp and stinging like sand. The old ranch stood swallowed by a sea of white, its windows flickering faintly with the dying glow of fireplace. The only warmth left in the world turned cold. Inside, Thomas sat alone in his worn armchair, his eyes empty, fixed on the fading fire. A half-empty bottle of whiskey rested near his hand, untouched. He didn't drink anymore. Not really. The house groaned and creaked around him, settling into the night, as if sharing in his grief, old and tired and hollow, just like him. Then came the knock. Not loud, not demanding. Just there, a soft, hesitant tapping that barely rose above the howl of the wind, as if whoever knocked wasn't sure they deserved to be heard. Thomas didn't move right away. Ghost didn't knock, he told himself. But the sound came again, slow, uncertain, cold. He rose, heart heavy, and opened the door. She stood there, barefoot, a thin, soaked shawl wrapped around her shivering frame. Blood, dark and dry now, traced the edge of her forehead. Her eyes, wide, empty, unreadable, met his. For a heartbeat, the storm between them was silent, and then she crumpled. His hands, stiff with shock, caught her just in time. She felt weightless, too light, trembling like a fawn lost in winter. He didn't ask questions. He simply carried her inside, laid her gently near the hearth, and covered her with the patchwork quilt his wife once loved. And for the first time in 3 long years, Thomas felt the silence break. Morning came slow, creeping over a world drowned in white. Snow draped the fence posts like forgotten linens. Icicles clung to the eaves, silent, sharp. Inside, the fire had burned low, but she remained, small and still beneath the quilt. Her breath was shallow, her brow damp with fever. Thomas hadn't slept. His eyes, red-rimmed and weary, watched her from across the room, elbows on his knees, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. Every so often, her face twitched, the kind of twitch that came from nightmares. He knew the difference. Books didn't teach that. Grief did. Sometime near midday, she stirred. Fingers flickered. A breath, slow and shaky. Her eyelids fluttered, squinting against the light. When she jolted upright, Thomas didn't move. His voice came low, steady. Easy now. You're safe. Her gaze darted around, wild, cornered. I ain't gonna touch you, he said gently. You fell outside. I brought you in. She said nothing, just stared, those storm-dark eyes heavy with things unsaid. You got a name? He asked softly. She shook her head. He couldn't tell if she meant no or not for you. That's fine, Thomas said, his voice warm despite the chill. Don't need one. He pushed a plate toward her. Toast, eggs, dried apple slices. She hesitated, watching him, watching the food. Then, with trembling fingers, she lifted an apple slice to her lips. She didn't thank him, but she didn't need to. The way her shoulders eased, just a fraction, was thanks enough. She wouldn't be gone by sundown, not yet. The days passed. Quiet, but not empty. She moved through the house like a ghost, careful, deliberate, always avoiding the things that might disturb the dead. And Thomas let her. He didn't ask who she was, where she'd come from, why she bled. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew what it felt like to be asked too soon. One morning, he watched from the barn as she stepped onto the porch, wrapped tight in the quilt. Her eyes roamed the yard, pausing on the rocking chair, the empty bench beneath the window. Then she froze. Her gaze caught on the photograph above the mantel, a woman laughing barefoot in a sunlit field, arms around a younger Thomas. The girl didn't speak, didn't react, but Thomas felt the shift in the air. Slowly, without a word, he took the frame down, brushed his thumb over its edge, and tucked it into a drawer. The silence that followed was no longer cold. It was permission. She crossed the room and sat in his wife's chair. And for the first time since the storm, Thomas let himself look at her, really look. The snow softened as the days stretched on, though the mornings still bit with frost. She stayed. She swept the floor without being asked, folded the quilt when she rose, brought water from the well. She moved like one who'd forgotten how to belong, but was trying to remember. Thomas noticed things. The way she flinched when he coughed. How her eyes snapped to the kettle the instant it whistled. How she jumped at the clatter of a drop spoon. A deaf girl wasn't supposed to react like that, but she did, that night, while she sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. Thomas spoke softly into the quiet. "You hear things, don't you?" She froze. Her grip on the mug tightened. "I won't tell no one," he added, gentle now. "Figure maybe silence ain't always what it seems." The fire cracked. A log shifted. And so faintly he thought he imagined it. She nodded. He exhaled, slow. "You hear me now?" Another small nod. And with it, the silence between them changed. Not a wall anymore, but a language. Nights passed slow, filled with small stories he shared. The stubborn horse that came back after being sold. The dog he'd had as a boy. The off-key tune his wife used to hum. She didn't laugh, but she listened, and something in Thomas loosened. One evening, after dinner, he brought out a leather-bound book and a piece of chalk. His sister's, he explained. She'd been taught to sign when words failed her. He showed her the signs he remembered. Thank you. Safe. Hungry. Slowly, carefully, she copied him. The first time her hand formed thank you, his heart ached with a quiet kind of joy. The storm came back fierce, wind screaming, rain lashing down. When he returned from calming the horses, she was gone. His heart sank, but then he saw the tracks leading to the pasture. He found her there, crouched over foal, shielding it from the storm with her own small body. No words passed between them, but none were needed. Together they saved the creature, and when she signed home with clumsy hands, Thomas felt something inside him break open. After that night, everything shifted. She moved through the house with quiet confidence. She set a mug beside him without asking. And one morning, she reached out, not in fear, but simply to touch his hand. In town, the stares came, the whispers. Thomas held his head high. When the clerk mocked her, he stood firm. And on the wagon ride home, when she reached for his hand, she held it, not as a stranger's, but as someone who had chosen to stay. The days stretched long, the light softer, gentler. One evening, beneath a sky painted in bruised purple, she showed him a scrap of cloth, stitched with patterns he didn't know, the threads worn but the care unmistakable. And Thomas understood. This was not the end of her story. This was where it began again. She pressed the cloth into his hands, her eyes searching his face, as if hoping he might understand what she couldn't say. Thomas turned it over slowly, his rough fingers tracing the delicate stitches, the rivers of thread that curved like winding streams, symbols small as raindrops but heavy with meaning. The fabric felt old, fragile, but full of life, like it carried voices from a place far beyond his dusty ranch. When he looked up, she nodded once, barely a movement, but enough. No explanations came, no words, only a silent story, a map drawn in thread, or maybe a warning. Thomas folded the cloth with care, as if it might fall apart in his hands, and placed it gently on the table. "I don't need to know everything," he said, his voice low, steady. "Not yet, but I'm here." Her fingers brushed his, light as breath, hesitant but real. And for the first time, the weight of the past felt less like a chain dragging behind them and more like a thread they could weave into something new. The quiet rhythm of the ranch was shattered one evening by the rumble of hooves, low and distant at first, then louder, as if the earth itself warned of the trouble coming. Thomas stood at the window, watching a line of riders cut through the twilight, dust rising behind them like ghosts. His heart tightened. The men from town, faces set hard, eyes dark with suspicion, and something colder, meaner. They dismounted at the gate, without a word, boots crunching on dry earth. One stepped forward, his voice like ice. "We hear you're hiding trouble. A girl who don't belong." Thomas felt his jaw clench, but his voice stayed calm. "She belongs to this land now." The men shared glances, sharp as blades. Funny thing, how folks come and go. But old debts don't vanish. Behind him, she stood, silent but strong, her eyes fierce, unbroken. Thomas stepped to her side. "No debt will touch her. Not here. Not while I stand." A sneer curled the man's mouth, but Thomas didn't flinch. "Leave before this ends in a way you'll regret." For a moment, the air hung tight as wire. Then, with grudging looks, they mounted and rode off, dust swirling behind them like the storm they brought. Thomas turned to her, his voice quiet but sure. "Trouble comes knocking," he said, "but I won't let it in." She reached out, fingers brushing his arm, not in fear, but in unity, and in that silent touch, louder than any vow, a promise was made. Dawn rose soft and slow, casting pink and gold across the land. The ranch, battered but standing, seemed to breathe with relief. Inside, Thomas moved to the house with care, boots silent on the old floorboards, the pale light catching dust motes that swirled like gentle ghosts. In the sitting room, she was already awake, framed by the window's glow, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the sun rise over fields rimmed with frost, her eyes clear now, no longer clouded by fear. Thomas paused, watching her, then crossed the room and sat beside her. She turned, meeting his gaze, and what he saw there was no longer a girl haunted by shadows, but someone steady, someone who had chosen trust. They sat in easy silence, the kind that needed no words, listening as the world woke. A bird song in the distance, the wind soft against the walls. "I won't let them scare you," he said at last, voice low, resolute. Her hands found his, cool but sure, and this time there was no flinch, no retreat, only warmth, only peace. She leaned her head gently toward his shoulder, and he felt something stir, something new, hope. The sun rose higher, lighting the fields like fire, and Thomas knew they were waking too. "We'll build from here," he said, "one day at a time." She nodded, and when her smile broke through, small but real, it was like watching winter thaw. The days that followed moved with the slow, sure rhythm of life returning. Mornings came bright, light spilling across the floors, chasing away the long-held shadows. Each dawn, Thomas would find her at the window, drawing invisible patterns on the glass, as if learning to see the world anew. Their quiet grew soft, no longer heavy with things unsaid, but easy, full of understanding. One morning, Thomas brought back a bundle of letters from town, letters left unopened for too long. The ink was faded, the edges frayed. He set them on the table, glancing at her. She watched him, curious, waiting. "I thought maybe you'd like to hear stories," he said, breaking the silence gently, "of places beyond these fields." He read aloud, his voice steady, words spilling like a river. Stories of distant towns, of laughter, of loss, of life. The room filled with their music. She listened, breath held, eyes bright, sometimes reaching for his hand, grounding herself in his voice. Later, she found a scrap of paper and, with charcoal, sketched what lived in her mind. Wild horses, endless plains, a house sheltered by trees. When she showed him, Thomas saw not just lines and shapes, but dreams waiting to be claimed. "We'll make that place," he said, smiling, meaning every word. Together, and they began, mending fences, turning earth for a garden. The fold grew strong, running free beneath wide skies. They worked side by side, sometimes speaking, more often sharing glances, gestures, a language of trust. The neighbors noticed. Some still whispered, but others offered nods, respect hard-won and honest. One evening, as the stars blinked to life in the deepening blue, she reached out and took his hand. Firmly, surely. No fear, no doubt. "I'm ready," her eyes said. He squeezed her hand gently, his own heart full. "So am I." And under that vast, endless sky, they both knew this wasn't just survival. This was where living began. The weeks brought change. The land woke with them. Seedlings pushing through thawed ground, the foal's coat shining in the sun. But rumors grew, shadows crept, whispers that reached beyond the town, colder, sharper. One evening, as night settled soft over the ranch, a group of men appeared at the fence line, voices low but cutting. Thomas saw them first. His hand gripped the porch rail, eyes hard, jaw tight. She came to his side, her hand finding his, sure and steady. "We face this together," that touch said, The men came closer, faces like stone. She don't belong, one spat. A wild thing, bought off a drunkard. Not fit for this land. Thomas stepped forward, voice iron. She's part of this land now, and I'll hear no more of it. Words turned sharp, the air tight with threat. But she didn't flinch. Her hands moved quick. Sure, signs that spoke louder than any yell. Thomas caught them, felt his heart pound, not with fear but with pride. You want to test us? He said, voice ringing clear. You'll see we stand stronger than you think. The men faltered. Her gaze met theirs, fierce, unyielding. Slowly, grudgingly, they turned back into the dark. Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Inside, by firelight, she reached for him, tracing the scar on his hand, the old wound of a fight long past. I'm yours, she signed, no sound, but all the truth in the world in that small motion. We're a team, Thomas said softly. Now and always. Under the stars, they sat close, the weight of the world on their shoulders. But between them, a strength deeper than words. Morning came golden, the air sweet with hay and wildflowers. On the porch, Thomas stood, watching the land stretch out before them, endless and free. She stepped beside him, her hand finding his. No words, no need. That touch carried every vow, every shared trial, every quiet victory. Through the days, they worked side by side. She mended fences, laughed softly when nails bent under her stubborn hammer, rode with him beneath a wide, wild sky. The whispers of town folk softened to nods, to quiet smiles. And at night, as the fire flickered low, she leaned into him, his arm around her not as shield, but as promise. You're home now, he whispered. She lifted her hand to her heart, signed home with steady fingers. And in that moment, the broken pieces of their lives came together. Not perfect, but whole, in the way only love born of patience and trust can be. The ranch wasn't just land anymore. It was theirs. And finally, so were they.